Okay, hello folks. My name is Andrew Ahn. I am the governance product manager at Hortonworks. The products I cover are Atlas and Falcon. So it's Apache Atlas, Apache Falcon. And we're here today to talk about big data challenges in the energy sector. And I just wanted to introduce you to some of our the folks that will be participating. Now this is going to be a fireside chat, which means the format is really a question and answer period. Just for pure logistical reasons, if you wouldn't mind holding your questions to the end of the session, Prepaul and myself will kind of filter through the audience and solicit your questions at that time. So that's a good segue into introducing the other MC, Prepaul. Let me give you a quick intro for Prepaul. Prepaul Singh is an enterprise data architect. He's working with Hortonworks, advising customers in the oil and gas sector. He spent a lot of time in the big data domain around Lambda and Kappa data science, delivery and analytic architectures. He and his team work very closely with customers in the oil and gas domain. That's actually a little bit conservative. Prepaul has done a lot of work in terms of creating reference architectures and has really helped us out quite a bit in terms of deploying H2B technologies with our customers. And last but not least, I want to introduce Vish Avasarala. He's our main guest here, and that's the person we're going to be having our question and answer period with. He's the global head of advanced analytics at Schlumberger IT, and his team is they're contributing towards creating the next generation of data-driven organizations at Schlumberger. He holds a PhD in information sciences and technology from Pennsylvania State University and a bachelor's degree from the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras for chemical engineering. He started his professional career in data science research domain at Pennsylvania State University. He holds multiple patents, and he's been cited by way of publications and press coverage. He heads the Advanced Analytic Initiative to support transformation of an organization that spreads across 128 countries, multiple business lines, into a data-driven decision-making organization. So this is just kind of a brief synopsis of what Schlumberger is about as a company. And we don't want to take the discussion into what Schlumberger is, rather what Vish is doing at Schlumberger with big data, right? So, essentially, he is leading the enterprise data strategy by developing comprehensive advanced analytic programs, which will include data science, data governance, obviously because of Apache Atlas, self-service analytic initiatives, and his work portfolio would have potential of over $200 million impact over a 5-year period. So can we just get a round of applause for our moderators? Thanks for joining us. Okay, so let's get started with the first question, and we'll kind of move forward. And as I mentioned, if you could hold off in terms of maybe your secondary questions till after the session, that would be really helpful, right? So we'll start off with the first question. So this is a kind of a general question that a lot of enterprises have to grapple with, right? So, kind of the topic of our discussion today, what big data challenges does the energy sector as a whole face, and how would you address them?
First of all, thanks, Andrew, for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion.
Sure.
So I think the several dimensions to this answer, right? First, obviously, is the obvious answer, big data, the volume. As many of you probably know here, oil and gas industry, the amount of volume is very, very high, right? For example, if you look at a typical well site, you will have tens and thousands of sensors generating multiple terabytes of data on a weekly basis, and then they accumulate over a period of time to petabytes very easily. Same is the case with seismic sensors and all that. That's one aspect. But the other aspect, obviously, is the sheer diversity of data. If you look at most global oil and gas companies, as you said, Schlumberger is spread across 85 countries, and most global oil gas companies are like that. Very diversified globally, and a lot of different business systems supporting different processes in different segments, right? So you have thousands of business systems that power your enterprise. So you have very rich data, but spread across different systems develop a cross-cutting analytic applications that connects these systems is a challenge. That's just on the structured data side. Now I talked about the unstructured data, and there's a lot of Excel file-based decision making that happens in large organizations across all the domains, right? So all the semi-structured data that sits in your Excel files. So the challenge there is how do you bring all this data into a cohesive view, cohesive platform, so you can do higher order analytics on top of that. That's the volume and variety answer. That's standard, but on the, coupled with that, I think what you have in the oil and gas industry is very significant market volatility and price fluctuations, right? So if you see what's happening today compared to like what was happening 2 years ago, that huge shift, I think that in my view, that's very unique to this industry. So that puts you under considerable lens, right? The idea is that how do you optimize for your operations or your inventory management, your supply chain management, and workflows flexibility, right? When the scenarios are so drastically different. So now compare, so you have a very high volume, very diverse data problem compared with in a very dynamic environment. So to me, at least personally, that's why I think, oil and gas is the next big thing for data science, and that's why I chose this domain after being at other places.
Wow, that's a lot that you covered there. Okay, so you have all these different challenges. Obviously you have a pretty strong machine learning background. Are you able to apply any of these, patterns or solutions that you've worked on in the past to oil and gas, and maybe specific areas that you might have derived benefit? Maybe you could talk about some of those.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned previously, right, Schlumberger, globally diversified company, working across 85 countries, and there are multiple business lines that operate in a semi-independent manner. So, we're trying to build analytics for that. Now, if some of you might know, we are on a mission to transform ourselves into one of the best run industrial companies by leveraging our size. So some of the metrics, we want to improve our people efficiency by 20%, our asset utilization by 100%, et cetera, et cetera. So all these, I think, to deliver on this, I think advanced analytics will be a key enabler, and that's where I'm driving my team to contribute. And I think that's where we plan to use the machine learning and Hadoop infrastructure, right? Traditionally, if you want to deliver on a very complex advanced analytics or BI workflow, you have different infrastructures and the different platforms that you need to move across from. So you have the data platform, you have the ETL platform, then you have the analytics platform if you're doing advanced analytics, right? You have the BI visualization layer, so which is, and then particular and different deployment maintenance layer if you doing your custom software development. Now, how do you cut across and how do you do cross-functional solutions, right? Because most transformative business projects are cross-functional, right? You need to combine across different streams to actually deliver. And that's where I think we will leverage the big data platform that we are building. So we are taking, I think, a fairly comprehensive view of the technology. So we have a three-pronged strategy. The data platform strategy, where we are building a data lake of all our business system data, operational data, and other forms of data within the company. Then we are building advanced analytics and BI layer on top of that. And then we are hiring the SMEs, the oil and gas experts who can make sure we are delivering impact and monitor the impact as we go through. That's the comprehensive strategy that we are building in. I think the Hadoop, for me, at least, I think the key advantage is that it's a unified cross-functional system. It's very unique. And obviously the volume and the variety it can handle.
Okay. Well, that's, you have a very substantial operation there that you're going to implement. In terms of timeline, and this actually was not a prepared question, so I'm going to slide it in there. You mentioned a bunch of different initiatives. Do you have a timeline of when you're going to implement some of these technologies? So, for instance, obviously you want to do a lot of this cross-functional collaboration. But do you have any targets for maybe deploying your data platform versus your operational aspect of it? I mean,
Yeah.
Can you kind of give us some insights time-wise?
So we are pursuing aggressively, right? So we started on this journey with our Hadoop technology, with partnership with Hortonworks about 3 months ago. We have been doing some fair bit of work on the cloud before that. So we are engaging on in parallel lines, right? One is the strategic initiatives, where we are trying the architecture, security, governance layer on top of Hadoop. We're trying to map our existing IT process on top of that. And there is obviously a longer timeline for execution on top of that. So what we want to do is we want to establish standard design patterns. For example, how would you deliver batch, advanced analytics on batch data using a PI layer, for example. So we are establishing 3 or 4 design patterns instead of, so whatever problems we are solving, we'll force fit those into that design patterns, and that way, 2 years from now, it's not a maintenance or a support issue. Paul in Vision Houston is doing the same thing for the same problem compared to somebody out of Dubai or India. And so it's just the standardization that we are driving will just because for a large company like us, it will deliver value. That's one aspect. On a tactical basis, what we are doing is we are delivering value with some short-term engagements where we are basically saying, we will be able to integrate fairly diverse data, develop some advanced analytics workflows, and show results, and drive change in the field, not in a 1-year IT project, but within a couple of months of engagement, which is kind of a new thing, right? I mean, the timelines are much shorter from data to insights, and we're pushing aggressive towards that. So both of these obviously will converge, and then that will be our final 3 multi-layered technology stack with data, analytics, and delivery.
Okay. Does Paul know that he has to do this? Earlier you said that you want to get a number of efficiencies, 20% efficiency in people and 100% efficiency with assets. I think for those folks that are not familiar with the energy sector, they might not understand what those operational assets are. For me, when I first learned about tools, I thought they might be hammers or maybe some hand trucks, but that's really not the case. So perhaps you could talk to us about what those types of things are, the challenges you face there? Yeah,
I'll talk about at a very high level. Mainly some of these initiatives are strategic, so I can't go into the details. But what I can do is, from my previous life at GE and stuff like that, all that work is patented, and at least presented in research conferences, so I can go into some detail there. As you know, so Schlumberger's upstream, we are upstream oil and gas service company. So we are in 3 big groups: the reservoir characterization, productization, and then the drilling group. In each of that, we have thousands of tools that go onto the well site to actually provide services to our end customers. And then all of these tools have fairly sophisticated sensors that collect data in real time as they're operating. That's preserved on their systems. Now, so you're talking about fairly complex data structures, sensors operating at very, very high frequency and all that. And pumping data back to a central hard disk somewhere that we want to build it. That's the Schlumberger oil and gas version, right? So I can talk about the kind of work that we did at GE in some detail, right? At GE, we were at the forefront of trying to push for prognostics and health management on top of our tools. So what we'd do is we'd get data from control systems, sometimes in real time, stream it to a central server, and then run some time series forecasting algorithms on top of that to give you a prediction of remaining useful life of that tool. Essentially, we'll be able to say, this tool will fail probably in 3 days with about 90% confidence. So we were able to do that. So for example, for GE locomotives, I was part of a project where we we developed a fairly sophisticated system using neural networks and case-based reasoning and a cloud-based mechanism. And a fair amount of locomotives that run in the US use that system to monitor themselves. So the key, at that time, we were not Hadoop based or anything like that. I think the key interesting aspect here is, so we did at GE multiple projects, right? We did for GE locomotives. Then we did the same thing for oil and gas compressors at GE. It's a project called FAST. If you're in the oil and gas, you might know about it. But we use the same team, so we were able to take the learnings from one system to another fairly easily. But what we missed are, we were not able to take the software or the deployment aspect of what we have done.
Yes.
The cool thing here that we are trying to leverage is if we standardize on a singular technology stack, and then the ease of migration of one set of project learnings to another, not only the people skills but also the actual work that has been done, is fairly impressive.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, maybe I can go to some other questions that we have. You mentioned that you were tackling a number of different projects. You were coming up with some patterns. Was there any thought to the sequence and why you picked those sequences? I know that you said you wanted a repeatable pattern, but maybe you could talk about maybe some of the details of some of those specific, projects you have in the pipeline. I mean, you kind of went over at a high level, but maybe you could talk about maybe some of the constituent components and what you're doing with that. I know that and you're working closely with Hortonworks to get those use cases done.
So yeah, as I mentioned previously, right, so we have both strategic and tactical initiatives. For the tactical initiatives, we are developing some standard advanced analytics workflows. The actual details of the projects, I think we're still in the IP phase, but I don't think I'm at liberty to share them. But I think what it's allowing us to do is not only do real-time processing of real-time process optimization, but also look at the entire archive data and answer what-if questions or get historical patterns. For example, I'll talk about, to give you some real use case, right? I'll talk about a project that we did at GE again. That's out in the public domain, so I can speak about it freely. So we had a project called Smart Room, right? What we did was we placed cameras on top of hospital beds and sink stations, and our RFID sensors to detect somebody entering into the room, pressure sensors on the bed to see if somebody is on the bed or not. And then we had data streaming into a central server using JMS system to try to detect if caregivers were washing their hands before they were tending to their patients. Sounds like a trivial thing, right? But if you're in healthcare, it's actually a huge issue because a lot of people get affected. And many people actually die also because of infections that are acquired because of that. So we did that project, but the thing that we lacked at that time, this was the pre-Hadoop world, at least for us, is how do we look at this humongous amount of streaming data and answer questions based on, answer questions that were not known to us before, right? So if we know a particular thing that we want to know, we'll code it and we'll do it. But archive all this data, go back and run a query engine on top of that. And say, okay, for example, Andrew is fantastic most of the times, but on Sunday at 2 p.m., 2 to 3, he's not very good at washing his hands. That question, if we wanted to go back, we had no system to do that. That's what, and the cool thing about Hadoop, that's the reason I'm excited about the Hadoop is that it gives me the ability to go back and do a deep dive on not on some downsample set of data, but the entire data set. I wish we had Hadoop at that point of time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Actually, those are some of the prepared questions that I had set up, and some actually ad hoc questions. Do you have any closing thoughts before we open it up? I think looking at the audience, I think there's quite a few questions that they want to ask, and we want to make sure that we have plenty of time to try to address them. So, do you have any closing thoughts you want to mention?
No, I think thanks for the opportunity. As I said, in my career, I moved across several things, and I'm very excited to be in the oil and gas domain. I'm fairly new to it, right? I've been here 6-7 months. I've learned a lot. I think some great things will happen here. And to me, as I said, data science is going to be key enabler for oil and gas.
Yep. Yep, I totally agree. A lot of areas that we can make improvements. So at this time, let's open it up to some questions, and I'm going to go into the crowd as well.
So
Okay,
Yavesh,
that's
thank you
what I
very much for your opening remarks. If anybody in the audience has a question, they can, they can raise their hand, and I can come over and we can ask a question. So I think, Vish, one of the questions in the audience is around. Do you have any thoughts around how are you going to work from an infrastructure point of view? How your clusters are going to be scaling up, etc.
So we are building infrastructure. It's a pretty straightforward process, right? So we have, as a company, we have operations in multiple countries. So that places some strict restrictions on where we can host data. So that drives where the infrastructure is placed. So once we have that, we are leveraging our relationships with Hortonworks and a couple of other partners to build out our data lake. And we are doing it in a phased manner. We are starting out small, and Hadoop is easily scalable, right? By definition, you can add more as the demand piles up, and that's just planned, for the future.
Thank you so much, Vish. Anybody else has a question while we're?
Oh, there's one behind you, Ripal.
Yeah, Vish. You want to take that?
No, you can. I'll take this side of the room.
Well, I'll be back with you in a second. Sorry,
Let me get on mute here. So Dan, let me take you.
So Vish, I think another question in the audience is maybe as you're embarking on your big data journey, right? And you're successfully proving out some of these technologies. Can you probably look in the future? I mean, it's a futuristic question, and in your based on your vantage point and based on your history of working in the data sciences domain, what do you foresee any gaps which may come up?
Yeah, so I think the answer is there are a couple of dimensions to the challenges, right? One, in the data science, I think this is kind of slightly unique to this field. Depending on who you hire, even after the product is delivered, the impact could vary by order of magnitude. Person X could have delivered 10x versus person X, Y would have delivered X dollars of impact. So the key thing is to hire the right talent. And obviously right now there is a scarcity of talent, so you need to be very, very calculative and very methodical in going for hiring. That's one of the things that we are addressing. And also it's not about just one type of talent, right? You need data science skills, you need software skills, you need BI visualization skills, you need data modeling skills. So how do you build a team across the spectrum, which has the skills across the spectrum to deliver excellence on a continuous basis? That's one of the things. The other thing that's kind of unique to Hadoop is there's always, it's a very, very fast and dynamic environment, right? There's always something cool happening outside, cooler than what you're doing right now. So how do you make sure that, you don't get distracted by what's cool, what's the next big thing, but just use your current tool set to deliver. And I think for standard industrial scale companies with standard IT companies, it's a challenge just to even adapt to such a dynamic and fast environment. So we are leveraging like agile project execution methodologies across all aspects of delivery to bring in this and then building on top of it.
Right. So again, there was.
Okay. Can I get? You're going to ask another follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
I have a gentleman here that had a quick question. So this is, and I hope I don't screw this up. So.
What you know to do.
So I'll try to do my best to encapsulate the question. So kind of endemic to the oil and gas industry, there's a great dearth of data, and there are these notions of data historians right? That they capture a lot of this time series data and compress it. And the question was, and I hope I'm doing justice to the question, is how are you able to get value out of this, and how are you able to incorporate it into your current processes for analytics and in your operations?
So the question was, how are you using?
I think it has to deal with historical data that has already been collected. How are we able to leverage that to get additional insights? Would that be fair?
How do you get the data out of your data history into Hadoop?
Sure. And I know there's a number of phased approaches. Is this something that you're addressing right now? Is this one of the primary concerns you have, or is this something that you're going to work on in your roadmap?
So you're basically saying, how are we using historical data to drive insights currently? I can talk about one example, right? For example, one of the POs that we've done is look at historical tool performance data on well site, and historical maintenance data and reliability data, integrate all of that on a Hadoop using Hadoop technology, and then try to look at insights on how the operating conditions are affecting your maintenance or your tool reliability. So as you can imagine, right, because of the number of proliferation of sensor technology, each tool has few thousand channels. Now, which channels do you look at, and how do you correlate with failures? That's where advanced analytics layer comes into picture. So you use fairly sophisticated search ideas based on data science driven approaches to say, okay, this is the channel, these are the few things that seems to have an impact, and then we develop failure models using something like a particle filter or something like that to say we are able to predict the remaining useful life of this tool based on historical data. And that's how this model will drive value in future, because we know what happens when this tool is used at this pressure and at this temperature for this many times. That's how we generate value on a continuous basis.
Great. Thank you very much.
I think there are two important questions which came up in the discussion, right? And I think one of the question which is because you're spread across so many countries with so many business lines with so much diversity in your business, right? So the question is, as this data is getting generated, for example, in Saudi Arabia, or if it's happening in Indonesia, Malaysia, versus in Alaska, right? I know that you are embarking, or you have actually started this joint co-development with our product management team, Andrew, around some governance initiative around this data. So given the fact that this data may reside at various places, are you also thinking about some governance related strategies?
Absolutely right, and I think there are a couple of answers to that. One, I will give it to Andrew because he's the guru of governance, and we are collaborating with Hortonworks on developing a governance platform, right? And to go back to the same problem statement that I made earlier, if you're looking at a particular circuit board on a tool, right, what are all the places it has been to do jobs is one question, but how many times it has been repaired, how many times it has been replaced, what firmware, software version is running on it. All this requires a lot of metadata management and tagging. So all that is important to do any higher order analytics, right? That's where we are working with Hortonworks on the Atlas project. And Andrew, you can chime in on.
Oh, I'd love to. This is a completely shameless and self-serving plug. We have a session today at 2:35. I encourage everybody to join, and you can get your fill of governance, because it might be the most exciting part of the Hadoop stack. Well, my opinion anyway. I do have another question though. It was from this gentleman over there, and Vish, to the extent that you're able, very briefly, could you talk about any specific big data challenges that you had to face with an operational aspect or staffing specific to Schlumberger? And I did mention to the questioner that your response may be brief because of certain types of things you cannot divulge.
I can talk at a very high level, right? One thing is, a company this size, when you say data so diverse and spread across dominant systems, developing a canonical normalized model of data is going to be a challenge. And the way we are addressing that is we're trying to punt the question, basically saying we won't do any canonical data modeling till we absolutely need to. So we use the late binding schemas on Hadoop to essentially match snippets of data that we absolutely need to create higher order impact. That's one. The other is what I told about, right? What talked about the data science. Was it the talent attraction piece? Was it the second part of the question? How do you attract people?
Yeah, I think you answered both of them in terms of organizational versus technical or staffing. So I think that you kind of covered both. Perhaps maybe you could talk about the staffing portion. Is that something that you're investing heavily in?
Yes, absolutely. We are, and if anybody is an expert in Hadoop, any stack of Hadoop technology here and is looking for a career, please reach out to any of us, right? A lot of Schlumberger folks here.
Yeah,
so we are hiring aggressively, and I think it's a slow process. I mean, we need world-class talent, and we are hiring aggressively. And at least I am very happy with the team we built so far. Mm-hmm. We're building both in Houston, Texas, and also Pune, India, across different stacks of delivery.
Great.
So Andrew, how are we doing on time?
I think we have a little bit of time. I think there's another question back here. Was there another one that you had?
Yes, there was a question in the room. Actually, there are two questions, but I'll take
your
the
turn.
first
So
one.
why don't you pick one up and then I'll ask this gentleman
Exactly.
next.
So the question is, is there some process which you're going to apply to prioritize some of the requirements which you're envisaging coming to you as you build out this data lake?
Yeah, it's all driven by impact. So what we are trying, so we have, as I said, we have a three-legged strategy, right? We have SMEs who are oil and gas experts within the team. And as we are embarking on a transformation process to be a data-driven company, so there are some metrics that we are committed to, we want to achieve. And most of the priorities are driven by those metrics. So how can we generate the largest value in the shortest time? And our SMEs help us with prioritization of our pipeline. Obviously, there's a lot of demand for our services, and we are at a premium now, but we have, I think, fairly good process to actually prioritize between different.
So Andrew, I think you're taking another question, but can I go ahead with the next one? I think we had a question about based on your experience, from all the data sciences and machine learning, the body of knowledge which you have accumulated, the question was that a lot of these use cases, you are trying to achieve operational efficiencies, right? Are you also planning in near future to start addressing and effecting change, say for example on the drilling side, right? So how would this program, which you are responsible for, will impact things beyond operational, namely drilling, for example?
Absolutely right. So I think something like what Hadoop will, or some of the big data technologies will enable, can have a very strong impact by definition. For example, if you can in real time monitor data that's streaming from your tools and say, this tool will fail in the next job or in the next 5 minutes, so plan for a different version, or just go slightly slower on what you're doing right now so that you minimize the impact of shocks, etc. The NPT will fall down, so that impacts drilling. The other time is the real-time capability, but imagine just in real time optimizing your drilling process based on some geological model that's being fed by data that's being collected based on the formations, right? So all these things can happen. Obviously, my team is right now focused on enterprise data. As I talked about, we're building the data lake, and we're doing advanced analytics on top of data lake to support the transformation initiative. But we'd certainly love to venture into those aspects as well.
Great, thanks, Vish. If I can slip in another question here. To the extent you can, with that little disclaimer, I know that some of these things may be proprietary, but the question was, you've got this great, big data effort. You're able to collect all of this data, and you're doing this, amazing cross-functional analysis. Are you planning to share any of that with other of the other participants in the energy sector, or is that something that is a little bit too far for you to think about?
So a couple of answers there. One, we are participating in the open source community, right? But the project Atlas, for example, I think the work that will come out of that will be driven by some of our expertise in oil and gas industry, and we are trying to address some issues. I think that will be useful for companies in this domain. That's by definition something that we can share. Some of the other aspects of, whether some of these analytics will be customer facing. There are teams within Schlumberger that are looking at using advanced analytics to optimize their customer offerings. So that will happen too. I'm not obviously at the liberty to disclose the timelines or even the scopes of those initiatives.
Great. I really appreciate that. By the way, obviously Schlumberger's leadership is kind of proven by the fact that that we actually have Vish's time here, and all the work that we do in Atlas, is in the open source community. After June, when we have our initial release, that's out in the public. You'll be able to comment on it, and for good or for ill, hopefully it'll be nice. All the comments and the code will be available to all. Right. So did you have another question, Pripal?
I think. Does anybody else have a question in the audience? Otherwise, I'm free to ask my own questions.
Go ahead, Vish. Pripal.
Yeah, I guess we all know that Schlumberger kind of impacts the oil and natural gas industry in very fundamental ways, right? I think I'm building on the question Andrew just asked. Is from your vantage point, how do you see the body of work which you're doing impact some of the operators, etc.?
So I think in a very positive way, as the service providers become more efficient, right? As we decrease our NPT, or as we increase our efficiency in terms of how we allocate people, and as we are able to better staff up based on predictive analytics on what's coming, I think what the customers will see is better service by definition, and I think the experience will be good at a very high level. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, folks, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I think we have to wrap it up after that. So any burning questions you have to ask? All right, well, thank you very much for coming. Let's get a nice round of applause for Vish for taking the time here.
Thank you.